When Uber first appeared, it didn't look like a transportation company trying to politely enter the market. It looked more like a technological invasion. In city after city, country after country, Uber launched first and asked permission later. Regulators were confused, taxi unions were furious, and users were fascinated. But the most controversial part of Uber's rise was not just its technology, it was its willingness to challenge, bypass, and sometimes openly defy existing laws. To understand this strategy, we have to go back to the beginning. Uber was founded in 2009 with a simple idea: tap a button, get a ride. At that time, most cities had tightly controlled taxi industries. Licenses were limited, prices were regulated, and entry barriers were high. Uber's model didn't fit neatly into those rules. Instead of adapting itself to regulations designed for traditional taxis, Uber often argued that it wasn't a taxi company at all. It was merely a technology platform connecting drivers and riders. This distinction became the core of Uber's expansion playbook. By defining itself as a tech intermediary rather than a transport provider, Uber attempted to operate outside many existing taxi regulations. In practice, this meant drivers could join without expensive taxi medallions, pricing could be dynamic, and operations could begin rapidly. In many cities, this immediately created legal conflicts. Authorities claimed Uber was operating illegally. Uber claimed the laws were outdated. But Uber didn't wait for legal clarity. The company frequently entered markets before regulations were settled. The logic was straightforward: build a large user base quickly, become popular with consumers, and make it politically difficult for governments to shut the service down. Once thousands of riders depended on the app and thousands of drivers earned income from it, banning Uber would no longer be just a legal decision, it would be a social and economic one. This aggressive expansion triggered dramatic confrontations. Taxi protests erupted across Europe. Courts in several countries ruled against certain Uber services. Some cities issued fines, while others attempted outright bans. Yet Uber kept pushing. Even when specific services were restricted, the company often modified its product, changed operational structures, or negotiated new regulatory frameworks rather than exiting entirely. Critics argued that Uber's approach amounted to move fast and break things, applied to regulation itself. Instead of complying first, Uber expanded first and adapted later. Supporters, however, saw a different picture. They viewed Uber as a catalyst that forced governments to modernize outdated rules, increased competition, lowered prices, and created flexible work opportunities. Internally, Uber's early culture became a subject of intense debate. Reports emerged over the years suggesting that the company closely studied local regulatory weaknesses and designed tactics to survive enforcement pressure. These controversies fueled the narrative that Uber's global growth was driven not only by innovation, but also by calculated legal risk-taking. However, Uber's story is not just about defiance. Over time, the company shifted strategies. Facing mounting legal challenges, leadership changes, and public scrutiny, Uber increasingly pursued cooperation with regulators. It invested heavily in lobbying, policy discussions, and compliance mechanisms. In many regions, entirely new categories of law were created to govern ride-sharing platforms, effectively legitimizing what had once been considered illegal. This transformation highlights a key reality of technological disruption. Innovative business models often collide with regulatory systems built for older industries. Companies like Uber operate in gray areas where legality, policy, and consumer demand interact in complex ways. What one group calls illegal, another may call inevitable progress. The rise of Uber also revealed how powerful network effects can be. Once enough riders and drivers join a platform, it becomes extremely difficult to displace. This created a feedback loop. Rapid growth increased influence, influence helped negotiations, and negotiations enabled further growth. In many markets, Uber's early rule-bending controversies gradually gave way to regulated acceptance. Yet the ethical questions remain. Should companies be allowed to operate first and seek legal approval later? Does consumer benefit justify regulatory disruption? Or does such behavior undermine the rule of law? Uber's history sits at the center of this debate, serving as both a case study in disruptive innovation and a cautionary tale about corporate power. In the end, Uber did not simply conquer markets through technology alone. Its expansion was shaped by legal battles, political negotiations, public opinion, and evolving regulatory landscapes. Whether viewed as a bold innovator or a controversial rule breaker, Uber fundamentally changed how the world thinks about urban transportation. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. In the modern economy, innovation doesn't just compete with businesses, it competes with laws, institutions, and long-established systems.